Alright, so today we are talking about Brume. And alongside Brume, we are also going to be talking about Jung, because while I have spoken about this dude before, this event has very, very explicitly invoked his name and his philosophies, so here we go again. Right? Now, Carl Gustav Jung wrote extensively on the intricacies of human nature. It was his whole shtick. He was a psychologist, and one of the most notable aspects of his work is his model of the human mind. He had split it into three parts: the conscious, the unconscious, and the collective unconscious, the last of which played a very large role in this event. The conscious mind he likened to a spotlight on the stage. Whatever that light falls on are the aspects of ourselves that we consciously recognize and are aware of. And in contrast, everything that lies in darkness is said to be our unconscious, consisting of things that we don't actively acknowledge or even know exist. And it was this interplay, or more accurately, this friction between these two disparate parts, that both mold a person and give rise to various neuroses. Environmental and personal values lead one to repress certain aspects of themselves that they may find shameful or unacceptable, and though these things are shoved away into the darkness, they never truly disappear. Instead, they form what Jung refers to as the shadow, and the various masks used to hide the shadow and interface with the world as large, the persona. And in a sense, this idea is embodied in the caustic, tense relationship between Brume and Felicienne. Though Felicienne is technically a separate person, she is symbolically the stand-in for Brume's own shadow. The role that she plays in the narrative is that of the instigator, the one who not only has the keenest read of Brume's internal mindset, but acts on those same desires that Brume represses, to reclaim her rightful place, to find the jewel, to place her own needs and desires at the forefront. All of these things, aspects that Brume had repressed in order to live her humble life as a taxi driver. And though she refuses to admit it, they are all things that chafe at her, gnawing away at her identity in the darkness until Felicienne finally throws them out into the light. However, beyond these two, there is also a third aspect at play here. If Felicienne is the shadow and Brume the ego, then Celia is the persona, the representation of what Brume is supposed to want, the things that she tells herself she wants: stability, a mundane life, a normal set of friends and family. All things that Brume subconsciously sacrifices in the hopes of becoming what she truly wants to be, something that Felicienne herself points out.
Who could blame you for triggering the curse? You weren't chasing treasure, not by choice, not like your parents. All of this to pretend you are unwillingly caught up in this adventure. You even get to play the savior. And oh, how your dear little friend fits the role of a damsel in distress. All you need is a villain. And that's where I came in, just as you wished.
Her shadow and her ego are at war, with integration being the only way to reconcile these two disparate halves. Now, Jung's idea of the capital S self, put simply, is the whole of the conscious and unconscious mind, the entirety of a person before socialization or society or repressions come into play. It is both the starting point of a person and ideally the end point. The shadow is as much a part of a person as the conscious mind. It cannot be discarded, and to disregard it for too long would eventually lead to neuroses. And Jung's proposal for addressing this rift and reattaining the wholeness of self was what he had called the process of individuation. The integration of the shadow into the ego, the acknowledgement and acceptance of one's own repressions. However, he also described a negative prognosis should the integration of the shadow be done carelessly or worse, completely ignored, something that he had referred to as shadow possession. To have the shadow merge and drive the ego, as opposed to the shadow integrating safely, essentially to have one's actions driven by the sum of the repressions. Now, Brume's own shadow possession catalyzes through the great shock she receives within the catacombs, but this was not the single instigating factor. Felicienne had spent a considerable amount of time wearing her down, sapping away at the integrity of her soul, and like the encroaching shadow, anytime Brume tries to resist or in moments of great duress, Felicienne comes to the fore, domineering her actions, at one point even literally taking the wheel for a moment, leading to predictably disastrous results. In the sanctum of her mind, after losing her body, Brume recounts Felicienne's infatuation with a particular brand of sweets, Ladurées macarons, to the point that she was forced to plan her entire day around obtaining them. However, she then goes on to reveal that this entire time, it wasn't actually sweets that her employer had been eating. Rather, it was fufu sashimi. the tutelary, Brume's familiar and an entity that shares a deep spiritual connection with her, a very visual representation of the consumption of her entire being. It was not a sudden and immediate shift that put Brume's soul in peril, but the accumulation of numerous little grievances left to fester. Bland, mundane repetition, the insidious stagnation of routine, suppressing her true desires for what her fears had told her was the safer and more acceptable way of life. The would-be great tavernier adventurer reduced to a chaperone, forever bending to whatever struck her employer's fancy, like picking up macarons. The shadow makes itself known in these subconscious actions, and much like the possessing shadow, Brume slowly began to accept more and more of Felicianne's demands into her life until they fully ruled over her. Now, I want to note that to Jung, the shadow was neither inherently positive nor negative. It was simply a repository of the unconscious mind where repressions are sequestered and masked. Though we may view certain aspects within the shadow as inherently negative, they don't actually need to be so. For example, one may repress confidence if they are told that expressing such a quality is overtly prideful, adopting a meeker persona while simultaneously castigating themselves whenever that persona comes into friction with their self-worth. And similarly, although Felicianne is very clearly a malicious entity, at least at first, her existence alongside Brume is not wholly negative. Beyond the obvious lightning powers that places Brume as one of the hardest hitting damage dealers in the game, Felicianne provides introspections that Brume would otherwise outright reject. She is in her head, she is a part of her. Brume can deny it, but both know it's a lie. She forces Brume to acknowledge their truest desires, to face her own selfish actions towards Celia, and recognize her yearning to follow the call of the Tavernier blood. She speaks of the pair's discontent towards Beryl, voicing their misgivings over both her true goal and her treatment of them, a discontent that Brume vehemently denies, yet is obvious in her bearing after each storm and after each failed ritual, her efforts being put to waste. Most importantly, Felicianne spurs Brume to change, inciting her to take a step forward, to not remain stagnant dreaming of an era that has now passed. And this is represented by how Felicianne presents as an enemy. In her boss fight, Felicianne appears as an amalgam, the upper torso of a woman fused to the Eiffel Tower. It is a striking image, however it's not the first time the motif of a tower has been used in this patch. The tarot garment for this version is for Caconia, and it is a rendition of the Tower Arcana, fitting as symbolically the tower represents a time of great change, of sudden and tumultuous revelation, the old being discarded away to make way for the new. With Caconia, that would be the sudden upheaval of her life in Vienna, of realizing that all the things that she had fought for were either wildly naive or just demonstrably false. The same thematic can then be applied to Felicianne's appearance, though notably she appears in the inverse. Now, in tarot readings, a card inverted can sometimes be interpreted as a reverse in the symbology or a shift in its implementation. In the case of the tower, though the base interpretation of impending change may still persist, the inverse can point to an interpretation that is arduous or difficult. The person in question may have difficulty moving on to the new or may be tempted to cling to their old way of life. And this is the crux of Brume's character story. Jung's idea of self-actualization and shadow integration was never a one-and-done sort of deal. To him, it was a process, that the goal was wholeness, something that could potentially take the entirety of one's life. If Flowing Feast is the chronicle of Brume's process of individuation, then the main event story is merely the diagnosis. It is Brume recognizing her shadow and confronting it, being forced to acknowledge her repressions, her true inner feelings regarding fate and family and her place in the world. No grand conclusions are made, nor is she given any real sort of comfort or reprieve. If anything, Brume leaves Paris with more burdens than when she had started. As would be implied by the inverted tower, Brume's transition into a new life and new era is rife with hardships stemming from her own refusal to fully let go of the past. She longs for a pure world, an idealized world where the jewel hunter snags a treasure, it itself the crystallization of mystique and legend, where the hero comes across those in need and subsequently saves them, where after a harrowing but exhilarating journey, they return home to accolades and fanfare, their name ringing triumphant across the land. The world, however, is far too cold for that. Upon the cessation of the fifth storm, Brume almost immediately adopts the persona of the famed Tavernier jewel hunter and is met with a resolute rejection of this fantasy. She is no famed hero. The Tavernier name holds no sway in the new eras, and the people treat her with disregard and even outright aggression and violence. Though she tries, she cannot save anyone, not the woman selling off heirlooms to feed her family, nor the miner buried in the shaft. If anything, her attempts to do so prove less than futile, leaving her worse off for it. The work is cold and relentless and filled with pain, and every connection that she makes is invariably severed with each passing storm. She toils for nothing and leaves behind nothing, no legacy, no name, not a single shred of evidence that she had ever existed. The very jewels that her tavernier blood impels her to seek have become nothing more than shiny stones, where once they were the goal, the crowning achievement, the symbol of something pure. Now they are nothing more than a means to an end. Tools to be sold to feed the hunger in one's belly or to stoke the flame of one's greed. Temptations that drive men to violence and apathy, even towards the death of one's own son, even towards the whittling away of one's own life. The world around her has undoubtedly changed, and it is Brume's stubborn clinging to the past that brings her so much grief. Now, this particular story ends on a bit of a trailing note. It's a bit odd, as other character stories have tended to end with more of a defined conclusion, whether it be for the better or worse for the character in question. Brume's, however, ends rather open-endedly. The Cashmere Sapphire, the jewel that took one person's life and almost took her own, is now shattered and worthless. Looking upon this very literal symbol of the futility of her actions, Brume comes to a conclusion. Though she may continue to go on adventures and hunt jewels going forward, her vision can no longer be shrouded with that naive veil of fantasy. She lets the sapphire go. She releases its shards into the river, and with that bids a final farewell to the past. It is an oath to the future, an embracing of the change that must happen, but what that change is and what the future may bring is still wholly uncertain. Her process of individuation remains exactly that, a process. And that's gonna be it. I like Brume quite a bit. Her design is really cool, and her character progression is one of those things that I really appreciate. I would like to see a bit more of her going forward just because of how her character story ended, but I mean, time will only really tell, right? Thank you to Bones and Apples, Vamp Aerostar, P-Damon C123, Amane Echo, Chip II, Sams V2, and Derp Huffer for being members. On the Patreon side, thank you to Paul A for supporting me there, and a special thank you to Chip II and Amane Echo for the 5 gifteds each. And to everybody, thank you all for coming in. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you on the next one, okay? Bye-bye.